Okay, so this is the Bible study for First Samuel chapter 20. And the text says, Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me? Never, Jonathan replied. You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. But David took an oath and said, Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes. And he has said to himself, Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. Jonathan said to David, Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. So David said, Look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says, Very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he's determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father? Never, Jonathan said. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? David asked, Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Come, Jonathan said, let's go into the field. So they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm the oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began, and wait by the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, Go find the arrows. If I say to him, Look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here, then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe, there is no danger. But if I say to the boy, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever. So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. That is why he has not come to the king's table. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot the arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about all this. Only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Go carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. So remember, you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive, so that you can follow along as we answer these questions about this text. And so we're going to begin reading those questions. Number one, what happened in our last Bible study in chapter 19? A, Saul ordered that David be killed. That's true. B, Jonathan advocated for David and reasoned with Saul. We remember, yes, that's true. C, David came back to Saul, but soon Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. So that was true. So it says that David was with Saul as before. Once Jonathan talked some sense into Saul, said, "He's not hurt you. What he's done has helped you. Why are you doing this?" Talked sense into him. But then when David had more victory, Saul again was jealous and angry and threw his spear and tried to pin him to the wall. D, David made his escape and joined Samuel at Ramah. That's true. E, Saul sent men to capture David, but everyone he sent began to prophesy. And when they came into the presence of Samuel and the other prophets, that should be when, I said and, but there's no and. When they came into the presence of Samuel and the other prophets, that's true. F, Saul came himself to find David, but began prophesying and stripped naked. Not sure what kind of prophecy that was. So that's all true. That's what we talked about last week, and we talked about the evil spirit that was in Saul again. We talked about the Spirit of God and how the Spirit of God drove out that spirit and thwarted that spirit, didn't allow the enemy to have his way, because God's Spirit is superior, God's Spirit is stronger, God's Spirit doesn't put up with these other spirits. So that was our text last week. So what's interesting is, David had been with Saul, but then he ran away because he knew Saul was trying to kill him. But Jonathan talked sense into Saul, brought David back, but then Saul again was trying to kill David, and so he was out there being protected by the very Spirit of God. Number 2 says, what happened in 20:1-4? A, David fled again. So it says he fled from Naioth and Ramah. So the Spirit of God was there and protected him while he was there. But now, how long is Saul and his attendants going to be here prophesying? And so David fled from that place where they knew where he was to somewhere else. B says, David went to Jonathan and asked, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? All of those, like reasonable questions, reasonable things that we would be asking if we were in his position, I think, trying to understand what's going on. And honestly, when it comes to this spirit of jealousy and selfishness and this evil spirit, unfortunately, that all of us were born into, this fleshly spirit, um, there's no reasoning. It doesn't matter that none of this makes sense. It doesn't have to make sense because the spirit has enraged Saul. And when we're all about ourselves, and when we're in the midst of that selfish rage, it really doesn't matter that none of it's reasonable. And so it's hard to answer those questions when somebody is out to get us, but because of this kind of spirit. C, Jonathan seems to be delusional and in denial about his father's motives. Perhaps, maybe not. I mean, it is his father after all. His father was at one time anointed by God to be king. I would assume. I think you want to believe the best about your father. And he had already talked to him about this. He had already reasoned with him. And Saul said, no, I'm not trying to kill him. So he brought David in. So when David asked Jonathan these questions, Jonathan says, no, I haven't heard anything about this. So in the end, probably not delusional, maybe in denial, maybe not recognizing the truth about his dad and the spiritual state of his dad. So I guess we can answer C however we want. We could say yes or no. I'm not sure he's delusional, but I do think he's in denial. And David explains it to him. So David told Jonathan that Saul is hiding things from him since he knows that David and Jonathan are close. So David says, this is what's going on. He is trying to kill me, but he's not telling you because he knows you're defending me. He knows the last time you tried to talk sense into him. And so he's not telling you the truth. And so then Jonathan's response is he says, okay, I believe you. I'll do whatever you want. What are we going to do? So this is kind of amazing. One of the things that we see in this text as we're reading through is the loyalty of Jonathan to David. And we've already talked about that and the brotherhood that they have and the love that they have. But we find out, we've sort of alluded to that, I think, throughout the previous few chapters. We've kind of alluded to the idea that that Jonathan is loyal even to his own detriment because it would have been his kingdom. But in this text, Saul points that out specifically. So if Jonathan didn't realize it before, if Jonathan was not thinking that far in advance, which I think he probably was, but if he wasn't, Saul pointed it out. You're hurting yourself. You're siding with David, and it's costing you your kingdom. And when we see Jonathan talking to David toward the end of this passage, we find out that Jonathan seems to have come to terms with that, and he's not worried about that. That he knows that God is with David, and he knows that it's David whose kingdom will be established, and he's negotiating for his own life and for the life of his descendants and his family. So he's saying, when God being with you gives you victory, and when you have the authority and the power to decide who lives and dies in the kingdom, please remember this relationship that we've had then. The son of the king does not have to negotiate for his own life. He could just be on the side of the king and take David's life, but he's not, because he knows that that's not right. So he's doing what's right, recognizing that that's going to cost him his kingdom. And we've said that, and I've been in Bible study with some of our teachers over the last few weeks. I know that that's been coming out, that hey, could Jonathan could be fighting for his own kingdom here, but he's not. But it was never sort of outright stated until this chapter, and we see that Saul knows it. He points it out to Jonathan, and Jonathan himself begins negotiating not from a place of power and authority, but rather from a recognition of who God has anointed, and saying, I'm letting you free because we're close, we're brothers, and we've made this agreement. Please remember it when you have the authority to make a decision about my life. And so we see that. So he says he'd do whatever David asked. Number 3 says, what did David ask Jonathan to do in 25-8? A, David asked Jonathan to go to the new moon feast and test Saul's motives. So yeah, so we're gonna do a test. I'm not gonna be there. I'm supposed to be there. Saul's gonna miss me. He's gonna ask about me. When you tell him that I've gone to Bethlehem, let's see how he responds. B, David proposed that he would hide and not go to the feast if Saul misses him and asked Jonathan where he is. Jonathan was to say that David asked permission to go to Bethlehem to a sacrifice with his clan. All that seems reasonable. A king should not be upset about that. So if he is upset about that, then he has some sort of ulterior motives for getting David to his household, to this dinner. He's going to do something when he's there, and that's why he's so angry. See, David suggests that if Saul is okay with David's absence, then David is safe. But if Saul loses his temper, Saul is indeed trying to harm David, because it's not reasonable for Saul to be upset about this. If Jonathan has given him permission, it's not a matter of disobedience or whatever, because Jonathan gave him permission. Presumably, Jonathan, as the son of the king, has some authority to be able to do that. Jonathan, we know, was quite the military leader himself. And we just would assume that Jonathan had so it's not a matter of how could you have given him permission. It was reasonable for Jonathan to give him permission. So if Saul is angry, there's only one reason, and it's not because he wanted to have a nice sacrifice dinner with him, a nice feast. It's because he had plans that he knew David wouldn't miss this. And so now here is the place that I'm going to set a trap for him. And when that is thwarted, presumably by Jonathan, is where the accusation comes, then he's very angry, and he calls him a son of a perverse woman. And so sometimes I think if you ever wonder where the modern curse words come, some of them came right out of the Bible, I guess. So we have a similar curse these days, I think. Although we probably don't think through what it means when we say that. Hopefully we don't say that as people of God, but I know that it's common amongst people of this world. D, David also asked Jonathan to kill him himself if he is guilty of anything. So he says, if you're hiding this, if you know that Saul's trying to kill me, and I deserve it because I've done something wrong, don't let Saul kill me. You kill me yourself. Like that's like the humane thing. You're my friend. Do justice on me if it is indeed justice. Jonathan says, no, that's not. No, there's no reason for that. I'm not hiding anything. That's not. So that was sort of a request for mercy. Don't put me at the hands of Saul, who doesn't love me. Kill me yourself as one who does, if that's indeed justice, but it's not. Number 4, how does Jonathan respond according to 29 through 23? A, never, if I knew that my father was trying to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? So he says, no, that's not, I'm not going to kill you. That's not, I don't know anything about this. B, he swore that within 2 days he would sound his father out and send word to David. That's true. C, Jonathan asked David to show kindness to him, even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. He seems to know that David will someday have authority to choose what happens to him. And I kind of let the cat out of the bag a little early on this. But yeah, so he says, when God has cut off all your enemies from the face of the earth, which Jonathan is confident God is going to do because God is with David. And by the way, he's aware that if Saul is really trying to kill David, Saul is one of those enemies, and God will himself cut off Saul as one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. And so Jonathan knows that, and Jonathan is saying, have mercy on me on that day. Show me kindness. And Jonathan seems to know what's coming. And so here's where we see the character of Jonathan that we've been alluding to for weeks already shown. And number 5, what happened at the festival according to 20:24 through 31? A, Saul said nothing the first day, assuming that David must have been ceremonially unclean and unable to attend, which I don't think would be uncommon if David had been in some sort of battle. I mean, there were a lot of things that could make somebody ceremonially unclean in the presence of blood or touching blood, which includes if you killed somebody. It could include the female uncleanness of their cycle. You can go back to Leviticus and read all of the things that make somebody unclean if you'd like to. The presence of a dead body, even without blood. Obviously, there's blood, but without spilled blood. So it wouldn't be that uncommon, and you shouldn't come to a feast in the Old Testament. According to the Old Testament law, you shouldn't come to a feast or to sacrifice to worship God if you've been unclean. If you've been around our church long, then you'll know that I believe that God was protecting His people, not trying to create legalistic things. I don't want any of you to not come to church the day after a funeral, or I don't want you to decide that on your uncleanness or your wife's uncleanness, that 1 week a month you probably shouldn't come to church. I don't want that to happen, and because I don't believe this is a legalistic standard. I do believe it was the law, but I believe the purpose of it was about understanding disease long before we understood what caused disease and what spread disease. And so in a lot of ways, this was very much like the isolation that we experienced during the pandemic. If you've been exposed, stay home. Don't come to the festival. Don't come to the feast. Don't spread it to literally everybody in Israel. Because if a feast like this, a festival, a sacrifice, everybody, I mean, even in Jesus's day, for a feast like this, people traveled from out of town to come in for the feast. And if you came to the feast and had some kind of a bloodborne disease that you spread to everybody, then all of Israel, for hundreds and even thousands of years, Israel was protected. Their nation, their entire nation could have been wiped out, but probably they were protected from widespread disease like this because they were told, if you've been exposed to something that could bring about disease, stay home. And so let me just say, I don't want to be controversial. I'm not trying to be controversial. I hated the isolation and many of the rules during the pandemic as much as anybody. But I really do see that in Scripture, God had similar sets of rules for His people, and I believe for their protection. And so, when some people ask, why don't we follow all of those rules today? I have two answers for you. I would say one, we understand first of all safety when there's blood. I really think the fact that we have rubber gloves, the fact that we know how we're supposed to handle even giving somebody mouth to mouth. When I was a lifeguard, I carried with me a mouth guard all the time so that I could help somebody in a time of need without exposing myself to some of the diseases if I didn't know what diseases they might carry. We have a lot more understanding of how diseases spread today. And so, legalistically following the rules of the Old Testament with regard to disease may not be as big a deal as it was because we follow other precautions that accomplish the same thing. Uh, on the other hand, I would argue that there certainly is a spiritual element um, to the protections that we took during the pandemic, and um, if if we if we were selfish and stubborn and refused to follow any kind of reasonable precautions, then it's possible that we found ourselves breaking something akin to this Old Testament law. And so, if we're talking about following the spirit of the law, I would say we should still be following the spirit of the law in taking reasonable precautions for disease and things like that, and we should not be so worried about holding to the letter of the law, perhaps in cases where we understand disease better and we have other ways of preventing it. Um, that's my understanding of how we should apply Scripture to our lives. Let's see. D, I believe in number 4 is where we. Oh no, we were in 5, and I was on A, and so explaining how that would not be uncommon, especially as a military officer who very well might have come in contact with blood or a dead body. B, the second day, Saul asked why David had not been there. So finally, the second day, surely he didn't make himself unclean, so he can't come to any of this festival. So Saul finally asked. C, Jonathan answered as he and David had planned, which was he's gone to Bethlehem for a sacrifice with his family. D, Saul's anger flared up and he called Jonathan names and accused him of siding with David against his own family. And that's true. That's what happened, as David predicted, and as was part of their understanding of this test. Saul said that David must die, for as long as he lives, Jonathan's kingdom will not be established. And I already talked a little bit about that. So Saul is pointing out the thing that we've all kind of had underlying in our study over the last few weeks. And Jonathan doesn't seem to have been swayed by it. So I think we can assume that Jonathan had already thought that through and was okay with that. Was okay with God's will regarding the kingdom of Israel more than his own selfish aspirations. Number 6, what happened in 20:32 through 33 when David asked when Jonathan asked why David must die. So in 32 and 33, it says Saul's anger flared up and he called him names. And in 32 and 33 says, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father, but Saul hurled a spear at him to kill him. So Saul tried to kill his own son for helping David. And Jonathan got up and left the feast and didn't eat the feast. So Jonathan got up in fierce anger, and I think we could say righteous anger, unlike Saul's, which was selfish anger. I think Jonathan's anger was righteous, and I think we brought this up in the message time last week, talking about how it's possible to be angry and not sin, but then it says, in your anger, do not sin in scripture. And so we know that it's possible to be angry. And sometimes in our anger, we could sin. And sometimes in our anger, it could be. So we know that Jesus got angry. And for a lot of people who don't know scripture that well, that might be surprising to you. It might be almost feel like blasphemy to you. But scripture describes a time when Jesus whipped people out of the temple, and um, we delineate that from a fit of rage in which he was out of control, or in which one of us might be out of control in a fit of rage, which just seems more like what Saul is doing. Jesus didn't seem to do that. Rather, he actually stopped to fashion a whip, so it was sort of premeditated and planned. And his anger was, I think, the thing that makes rage happen is how selfish we are. I think the thing that makes us fly off the handle and out of control is when our own personal emotions, reputation, or whatever, our own pleasure or power is threatened. That's when we fly off the handle in an uncontrollable way. When we have a righteous anger at an injustice, and our anger is based on what is right and wrong, and we're angry that something is being done that is unrighteous and is wrong and unjust, then we don't fly off the handle in that same way, because we're not personal. It shouldn't be about us, but rather we can take time to consider. Really, usually, I think it starts out as us being brokenhearted because we have the heart of God, and the mind of Christ, scripture calls it. And so because we are brokenhearted, it angers us that this is happening. And but we respond differently to that sort of anger. And I think that there's a difference here between Saul's anger and Jonathan's anger. But we see both in these verses here. The second part of number 6 says, how did Jonathan respond according to 34? I already talked about that. He got up, and I was really answering both of those. The third part, do we exhibit the same integrity and loyalty that Jonathan does in this story? And when we see his integrity and loyalty, he, despite the temptation that perhaps was there because of what his father said about him hurting his own kingdom, Jonathan wasn't swayed. Jonathan knew what was right, and he followed through with exactly what he said he would do for David. And even they wept together because this was the outcome. And obviously Jonathan had hoped something different. I would guess David hoped for something different, even though he was pretty convinced of what he knew. And they wept together, and now they know the outcome, and David's leaving. He has to go into hiding. But Jonathan followed through. He had integrity with all of that. Do we do what's right, or do we have a tendency to be swayed by what might be better for us in some way in the flesh in this world? Do we tend to respond selfishly, or do we continue with integrity?